So in this video, I'm going to talk about Mao Zedong's greatest legacy, the Long March, or known in Chinese as Changjeng. This is when Mao Zedong became, the chairman, the god in China. It's an incredible accomplishment, and I'm going to go through some of the details of this incredible journey. So we go back to the 1930s. It's the peak of the Chinese Civil War. And so Mao Zedong's Red Army, they were completely outnumbered and extremely low on morale. And they were trapped in their base in the Jiangxi province in southern China, as you can see on this map here. So Chiang Kai-Shek, during this time period, he would launch a total of 5 military encirclement campaigns, aiming at wiping out the CCP and gaining total control of China. And under Mao Zedong's leadership, the Red Army was somehow fight off the first 4 encirclements using his guerrilla warfare tactics. Or a better translation would be exercise fighting. Yes, Mao Zedong, he was a brutal dictator, but nobody can deny this fact that Mao Zedong, he's extremely high military IQ and his wartime tactics. He was once in a generation genius when it comes to these kind of fighting tactics. Then came the 5th encirclement. So Jiang Jieshi, he was determined this time to end the battle once and for all, and he ordered over 700,000 troops from the Chinese Nationalist Party, and they would encircle the Red Army. So now Mao Zedong, he was removed from the leadership position after the 4th encirclement because the leadership around him they didn't agree with his guerrilla fighting tactics, and this would proven to be a fatal mistake. And now faced with the reality of a total defeat and annihilation. So the remaining roughly 86,000 troops, they made one last-ditch effort to break through the enemy encirclement and flee to the north of the country, because that was their only option to seek refuge at a different spot. Then the 2 generals who were put in charge, there were Zhu De and Zhou Enlai. These 2 people were extremely important in Chinese history as well. And at the start of the Long March, these 2 generals were put in charge instead of Mao Zedong. And just 3 months in, due to the extremely poor living conditions and constant aerial attacks from Jiang Jieshi, more than half of the Red Army had perished from either fighting or disease or starvation. Mao Zedong, at the start of 1935, he would become Zhou Enlai's assistant, or number 2 in charge. You see, this trek was absolutely brutal. By the end of the journey, the Red Army would have traveled for over 10,000 kilometers or 6,000 miles, all by foot, in the most brutal condition imaginable to mankind. So the eventual target location was in Yan'an. It's a very remote location in northern China. The reason why they choose this location is because it's remote and it's close to the Soviet border and also close to the Japanese occupied Manchuria in the northeastern China. So once if they're able to settle there, attack will be extremely difficult to launch. And Mao Zedong, he needed the safe location in order to buy time. So let's talk about the spring and summer of 1935. Due to disputes within the Chinese Communist Party, this will lead the Red Army to part ways, and multiple divisions will split up and go their separate ways. But the eventual target location is still the Shanxi province, and eventually moving to Yan'an. So Mao Zedong, he will go on to lead his own brigade of men. So during the spring and summer of 1935, the Red Army will cross the Yangtze. This is the largest river in Eurasia. It was an incredible feat. Many would die during the crossing of this river. May 28th, 1935, the epic battle of Luding Bridge. I will make a separate video on this, but this is one of the most legendary battles in Chinese history, not just in the Chinese Civil War, but in China's 5,000-year history. I highly recommend watching clips and movies on this. It is simply incredible. And yes, the CCP would survive this battle in the end. In July of 1935, the Red Army would cross the Jade Dragon Snow Mountain. The peak of this mountain is roughly 5,600 meters or 18,300 feet. And yes, the CCP would make it through the mountain traveling by foot. I have no idea how they put this off, but it's nothing short of a miracle. August of 1935, the Red Army will pass through the Ruogai marshes. Conditions were absolutely horrible. Right after that, they will cross the very narrow Laizhikou Mountain Passage. And on October 22nd, 1935, Mao Zedong he would lead the first group of the Red Army. By this time, there was less than 8,000 men remaining. Yes, they started with close to 100,000. By the time they finally got to the Shanxi province, there was less than 8,000 soldiers remaining. That's how brutal this journey was. And by reaching the Shanxi province, Mao Zedong would become the undisputed leader of the Chinese Communist Party. And Mao Zedong, he sacrificed everything for this journey. See, during the encirclement battles and the Long March, he would lose his younger brother, and he would also lose the two of his sons. The CCP soldiers, they survived the most extreme, the most brutal conditions known to the history of mankind. They survived this journey for over a year. These soldiers barely had any clothing, and when climbing the snow mountains, they barely had any supply. Many soldiers are forced to eat grass, to eat snow and ice, to eat tree bark, and eat cotton medical supplies in order to survive. Even the commanders, someone like Mao Zedong or Zhou Enlai, at the best case scenario, sometimes they would get a cup of noodles. This act, combined with Jiang Jieshi's initial refusal to focus his forces on Imperial Japan in the early days of the Sino-Japanese War, this would turn millions of Chinese people against Chiang Kai-Shek, and in turn they would turn their support to Mao Zedong. This was the #1 key factor to Mao Zedong and the Red Army's eventual victory in the year of 1949. See, history, it's not black and white. Most of it is gray. Sure, you can talk about Mao Zedong, how he was a brutal dictator. No doubt about it. You know, he killed over 100 million people, probably the #1 kill count in history. Sure, he did lots of crazy things. For example, the 10-year Cultural Revolution, or the 3-year Great Leap Forward that led to the greatest famine in mankind's history, probably. But you see, history and war, democracy, communism, it's complicated. It's not black and white. Sometimes tough decisions, they need to be made, and oftentimes I think we need to look at all sides of the equation before making any judgments. I mean, Mao, he's not the perfect man by any means, but I think one thing I have to mention is that he was definitely a military genius, once in a generation genius, and he achieved a near impossible victory against Chiang Kai-Shek and the Chinese Nationalist Party. Yes, he did do a lot of horrible things along the way, but you have to look at the fact that he did many great things for the country of China. In my opinion, honestly, he is a better candidate versus Chiang Kai-Shek, because he made many mistakes along the way. As I mentioned in my previous video, at the Chiang Kai-Shek Memorial, he should have focused his forces and formed a united front with Mao Zedong to focus on the Imperial Japan much earlier into the Sino-Japanese War. China should have fared much better instead of suffering an embarrassing defeat for most of the war, before the tides of the war turned when the Americans finally decided to join the Allies' side. Now, I highly recommend watching movies and TV series on the Long March. It is just mind-blowing, and you can find many movies and TV series with English subtitles. It will change your mind, and it will change your perspective on the Chinese Civil War, and on Mao Zedong, on his leadership, and on the Chinese Communist Party. And on that note, that is going to be the end of this video. There will be many more contents to come on Chinese history and on my trip to Taiwan. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.